Hey everybody, this is Kevin Ring, President of FAM. Sorry for the small delay there. That happens here. Um, I welcome to another edition of Heart to Heart, and I'm grateful that we have some good guests with us today. Um, Kenny Kabitsky, Leanne Blystone, and hopefully Rufus Rochelle will be joining us. A lot of people have been focused on the spread of COVID in our federal and state prisons, and we wanted to talk to some people who recently got out of prison to figure out what was the view like from inside when they first heard about the spread, how the prisons reacted to it, and then also talk about how these folks were able to get out of prison early through compassionate release and expanded home confinement, and what that transition process has been like. So without any further ado, I just want to get right into it. So I'm going to start with you, Kenny, because you're somebody who's been on our radar for a long time at FAM, and we're glad that you made it out. And it's, I don't know if it's a miracle, but it's a blessing. And so I thought we'd start with you. Tell us a little bit about your story for people who haven't been following it so closely. There you go, right?
Oh, you got me now?
Yeah, gotcha.
Okay, good. Okay, now talking about the COVID-19, it kind of started gradually.
Well, hold on. Before you do that, tell everybody who hasn't been following your case as close as, your case as close as we have, what were you in for, how long you've been in, and how'd you get out?
Well, I was incarcerated in the latter part of 1994. So it's been quite a while, and I've seen a lot of changes. It was for, I had a life sentence for a drug conspiracy, and just not knowing, what laws are going to, come that might help me out. It was kind of, a challenge as I moved around through the BOP. And this reform had, started very gradually in the early years, and it was really an arduous process at first. And then in the last, 5 or 10 years or so, started to get a little bit more earnest with public support and public awareness. And then folks like yourself at FAM and all of them really kind of brought it to light for all the followers and the issues that we were dealing with. And we had to kind of work our own reform and to find relief. And that's what happened with, in my case, the First Step Act was really kind of give me the chance, the first real chance to get past that statute of limitations on the appeal.
Yeah, so you used the compassionate release reform, is that right?
And that's correct.
And so you filed, and you had a life sentence though, yes?
Yes, I had a life sentence, and I actually started the compassionate release before the First Step Act. And it looked good. Matter of fact, I was kind of recommended by some of the prison officials, including the warden. But when in the BOP, if there's someone in a crucial place that don't want it to happen, it's easy for them to stall. And that's what happened all the way up until the First Step Act, or maybe even a little bit forward when it looked like it was going to pass. I actually started in earnest for that provision of the First Step Act.
Yeah, and then, well, one, people who are watching are already saying welcome home. Like I said, it's a miracle, and I'm glad that that provision existed, because short of clemency, it didn't seem like there were many other options left for someone like you. Let me ask you now, let's talk a little bit about COVID. So you're in prison, and when did you start hearing that there's this virus spreading, and what was the feeling like inside?
Well, because I kept up with the news pretty good, I heard it right from the start, when we didn't even have any cases in the US. And, you're always kind of hoping, well, maybe there won't be. And then there was, a dozen, and like they had it under control and everything. And then it just, flowered from there, and it got worse and worse. And the more people who caught the virus, and deaths started occurring, and every day it was doubling, and then even into some of the BOP institutions, it started to get kind of scary because we were virtually, helpless, without a knowledgeable staff that knew what to do. Yeah, and there was a lot of chaos with them too, because they weren't sure what to do. They got some directions from central office, and they weren't really sure how to implement that. So it was chaotic times, and in the BOP, when they don't know what to do, they lock everybody down.
Yeah.
Only in this case, they called it a quarantine, which was pretty much like a lockdown.
Yeah.
And
Did you see people? I mean, did you know people who were contracting it? I mean, did they start testing and you see people falling sick?
well, no, thank God, in the whole time from the time it started to the time that ended, as far as I know, there was no actual cases in the same institution as me. We were in Estelle at the time, and no known cases there until the tornado shipped us out to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, and until my release, we don't know of any cases in the institution. And so I was really blessed in that respect. And it was a little bit scary because, rumors run rampant in prison, and they didn't know, there was rumors that they had, infected people or staff or something like that. And then when you don't see them doing the tests and you don't see them using the precautions that you would expect to come with something like this, it's easy to, get a little overly concerned.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Well, people who are watching are seeing our guests arrive in staggered formation, and that's going to get to one of my later questions about how are you handling the transition back, because this technology is changing so fast. So I'm glad you guys were able to make it. And Rufus, Rochelle, thank you for joining us. And you're another case that people at FAM have been following for a long time. And I would just ask you to start by just giving a short overview of, what did you get charged with? How long were you gone, and how did you get home?
First, my name is Rufus Rochelle. I appreciate you all for inviting me to this particular panel, of discussion, concerning numerous of subjects involving criminal justice reform. And first and foremost, I was charged with conspiracy with intent to distribute 50 grams or more of crack cocaine, count one, and possession of with intent to distribute 50 grams or more of crack cocaine as a count two. And then later I was eventually charged with obstruction of justice, which I was convicted on each count. The indictment in which I was charged as far as the instruction by the judge, he instructed the jurors that I was only, they could only find me guilty of the 50 grams, within that range, 50 grams or more range. And I was under assumption that this is what I was charged with, back in May the 31st, 1988, when I was indicted. That's when I was indicted along with my co-defendants. And on the assumption that this is, the indictment being a true documentary, of the charge that you're facing. And I went to trial, on the 50 grams or more of the crack cocaine along with my co-defendant. And to make a long story short, eventually the trial, lasted about 2 weeks in the Northern District of Florida, Gainesville, Florida Division. And the jurors found us guilty, or found me guilty. And they checked the verdict form according to the instruction of the judge, and being, in terms of the jury instruction, which was 50 grams of crack cocaine. But during the sentencing phase, not, where the juror is not present during the sentencing phase. Little did I know that I was going to get sentenced to everything outside of what I was found guilty of. I was sentenced for 24 kilos of crack cocaine. 24 kilos, because apparently they saw where the 50 grams of crack cocaine would have possibly put me within the 10-year range, because 50 grams or more during that time frame carried 10 years, 10 years, more. But little did I know that I was going to be hammered with the, everything that the jury didn't find me guilty of. And with 24,000 grams of crack cocaine, which is equivalent to 24 kilos at 100-to-1 ratio in terms of the punishment in reference to powder cocaine.
Right. And was it because it was that amount that you did not benefit from any of the reforms that have passed, in the last 10, 15 years? Is that why you weren't able to get any reduction, or did you get any benefit?
Throughout the years. But, now being under the First Step Act, under section, 202, sections 2 and 3 of that, the First Step Act, I qualified for the First Step Act, and, which would put me out completely, give me immediate release. But the problem is, in my district, the Northern District of Florida, you got various judges that's giving their defendants the benefit of that law, because it's law, and it applies to me and numerous others. But I got a new judge, because my previous judge, Judge Maurice Paul, he passed, he died. And so they appointed a new judge. And he, in his on his caseload, he hadn't granted anyone the benefit of the First Step Act,
Right.
And there's only a few that's on his caseload.
But so you ended up getting out through the expanded home confinement, is that right?
Confinement.
Yeah.
And I think too, my case is, really I'm still in custody, let's not get that mistaken,
Right.
because, I'm still on the home confinement, but I'm still under the 100-to-1.
Yeah.
Right? And then two is the fact that if I benefit from that, it would automatically put me out, And primarily all the judges in that Northern District of Florida, which is Tallahassee, Pensacola, and Panama City area, is the judges are giving releasing guys, that's on the First Step Act.
Yeah.
But my case is probably, I would think, the oldest in custody crack cocaine case in America.
Yeah.
And I was, because I was possibly one of the first ones to be sentenced for crack cocaine.
Right.
And
Well, listen, we're glad you made it back, whatever it took.
yeah, that's right. That's right.
Let me ask Leanne. You did not have, fortunately, you did not serve as long as these two gentlemen. But how did you wind up in trouble, and what was your sentence, and how did you get out?
Well, I was indicted back in 2014. I had like 23 counts against me. I pled guilty to one, which was wire fraud. I was given 84 months, which is 7 years. I got out with compassionate release with the help of FAM, and I only ended up serving 5.
Okay. And when did you get home?
I got home on May the 19th.
And what was the compassionate release process like for you? You heard about this reform, and obviously applied through our clearinghouse, but were other people getting it, or how did you know that you might qualify, or or why did the judge even say you did qualify?
Well, I had originally applied myself. Like most prisoners, we try to do our own thing. Yeah. Our families already burdened with us being in there. But so my first attempt was denied. And I knew that I qualified because I had lupus and some other illnesses. So I was just about to retry again. And that's when an attorney from FAM contacted me. He put in, I think he contacted me on April the 20th. And I was out in less than 30 days.
Well, geez, that's better than most.
Yeah, I was
Um,
very lucky, very, very lucky.
Well, I'm going to ask you all because we started a little bit late, and I'm going to want to get to other people's questions. So I'm going to get through a few others and just ask you, just be as brief as you can. I know there's a lot to say about this, but and I asked this of Kenny already, but Rufus and Liam, when did you hear about there's this virus coming and sort of sweeping across the country, and we have this pandemic, and now it's getting into the prisons? When did you hear about that, and what did your prison, what did the warden, what did your officials do, and what actions did they take early on? Rufus, you could start.
I left prison the 24th of April. I was, went home,
Yeah.
and we went on lockdown March the 31st, in reference to the coronavirus. And as of that particular time frame of being locked down and so forth, I never seen a pair of gloves that was handed to us during the whole time frame, and no nothing in reference to sanitation, in terms of using no more than the soap, that we was receiving prior to the corona situation.
Mm-hmm.
And I think over that time frame, I'm sure I only received about 3 masks, 3 masks the whole time, frame, and
Yeah.
And so it had numerous of people in fear,
Yeah.
Because, I just can't, I would be, all honesty, they were in fear because a lot of guys in there with life sentences, where I was,
Mhm.
and that thing right there was, it's like a death person on death row, and waiting to die.
Yeah.
And that's the way guys feel now. It's like a double lockdown right now. This is, and I speak with various sources, as continuously, and they in fear.
Yeah. Yeah. No, we're hearing that a lot, and the families are definitely scared. Leanne, did you see anyone sick or experience symptoms where you were? And remind people where you were.
I was at FMC Carswell.
Gotcha.
I did not see anybody sick, but for the same as the things that Rufus said, we initially were not given any mask, any soap was on short supply. We got locked down on the 31st of March as well. And at that point, it was kind of like we didn't even really know what was going on. We knew about the coronavirus, but we didn't know how intense the situation was, or that we needed to practice social distancing, which you can't in prison. But
Right.
yeah.
Rufus, what facility were you in at the end?
I was at Coleman Media Facility.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say this, even some of the cells, the rooms, you got 3 men in various rooms, in the room I was in, fortunately, I had one cellmate, I was in the skill program, there at Coleman.
Yeah.
But you got other parts of the population where you got three men in the room. So how you gonna practice social distancing when you got 3 beds right on top of one another, 3 bunks on top, and 2, even if you got your roommates, so it's no way that a person could say, well, we not want to let guys out of there, because you got guys in there, numerous of guys got high blood pressure and chronic 3 illness, and high potential, and and numerous other type of diseases, medical ailments, serious medical ailments.
Did you guys, did anyone see folks get tested? I mean, Rufus, you've been out a little bit longer, but Kenny and Leanne, did anyone were they starting to test people in your facilities?
For me, not at all. No.
Kenny, was anybody tested at yours?
Not until we got to Lewisburg. And I mean, we call the test the taking our temperature every morning. Now, they did that religiously, but before that, there was very little or no test and a lot of the precautions. We weren't given masks to wear even when we were getting out for, showers and communication.
Yeah. Well, okay. So then you guys get out. You make it out. You must have been relieved. I know we saw pictures of Rufus the day he came home. We saw Kenny, all you guys, we're following these cases. So we see you get out and we're excited for you, but it's gotta be, I mean, Rufus and Kenny first, just an amazing transition because you've been in so long and the whole world's changed. But also you're coming out into the world not as it existed even 6 months ago because of the pandemic and the lockdowns on the outside. And I noticed Ellen DeGeneres got in trouble because at one point on her show, she made a joke that she said, it's like being in prison. We're all stuck in our homes and, we can't leave and that sort of stuff. And anybody who's been to prison said, no, this is 1,000 times better. but
That's exactly right.
So, but how did it feel? I mean, was it different because, I mean, you didn't know what to expect, or did you notice that, oh, this is different because I can't be around people and like even loved ones? Were you able to be around your loved ones right away, or did you have to worry about quarantining or things like that? How was that transition? Anybody?
Well, of course, for me, we had to, pay attention and respect the conditions. And by then, we all pretty much knew what we should do and shouldn't be doing. But the biggest thing for me was we now had control over it. We had some control of what the precautions we were going to make and the things that we could do. Were incarcerated, you had no control. You were a victim of the environment. And that was the biggest overwhelming difference for me. There's things I could do to protect myself for the first time. And then watching how everybody else was handling it, I did notice a difference when I traveled from the north up there in Pennsylvania down to the south. It was more rampant up there. So there was a lot more people taking precautions. And as we traveled, we could see it, lighten up the precautions, more people out and doing things and less people wearing masks. I was even surprised to, see a store owner that wasn't wearing a mask. We're up north, it was, the precautions were a lot more intense.
Yeah, no doubt. Rufus, how was it? What was the world like when you came home to it? What did it look like?
Well, when I was in prison, my mind stayed out of prison anyway. It stayed, I focused more on the outside because I stayed in communication with individuals outside of prison. Even if I had to spend my last dime on the phone, and everyone knew that was advocating for me, and not only advocate, but I often took my mind outside of prison and tried to connect with individuals and see what I could do to deal with their problems.
But it still had to be, I mean, like I said, I wasn't in that long, but there was still a big difference between going to commissary and then walking into a supermarket.
Oh, yeah. Most definitely, because even when I got out, I think, matter of fact, my first meal was at Boston Market, when I walked out of there, everyone, my family was out there, and even various staff was out there. Some of them started crying, the fact that, I done been in there so long, and then they seeing a person step out of prison that been in prison longer than the late Nelson Mandela, on ghost drugs, and so my mind was a lot on the ones that I was leaving behind, in prison. And I often think about those ones because I I do a Facebook Live program show right here every single night, primarily since I've been out of prison, and advocate for those ones that I left behind. Men and women. And I hadn't stopped. It's just like I did something before I came on your show, on this particular program, and
Yeah.
For those men and women. So that it occupies my mind with doing something that's more positive in life, and so that because I'm out, but it seemed like part of me is still there because I left all of the ones behind me. So freedom, is, we could say, well, we free, but freedom don't come until you see others free as well, and that's the way it is, especially when I worked in a law library for 21 years, and I read numerous of cases, during the time frame I was in the law library. And I speak to guys come up to me, man, daily. Man, don't forget me when you get out of here, Rufus, please, And someone with tears in their eyes. Even when I left, they gave me $180 after almost 32 plus years behind prison. That's what I was worth. Yeah. After leaving the plantation, 30 to almost $180. And there was a gentleman that came over in the wheelchair. I don't know how he managed to get by them, but he was in the wheelchair, and he hated to see me. He wanted to see me leave, but I used to always help him, in the wheelchair. Someone rolled him over there to say goodbye to me.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you this, people who are watching right now, a lot of people are just grateful that you guys are home and they're commenting to that effect. I want to ask you, Leanne, Rufus was in there long enough to not feel this sort of survivor's guilt, but I know that a lot of people do. And I mean, I'm wondering how you feel leaving that facility, and, because I know you've already talked about advocating for others. So I want to ask you two things, actually. One is, what was the process on compassionate release? How difficult was that? Where it sounds like it went pretty well for you, but what was the process? And then how are you, moving forward, but also thinking about the people you left behind, I guess?
Okay. Well, the compassionate release on the prison side is very difficult to maneuver, especially during lockdown. You can't make copies of something to show proof. And if you go to your counselor, you can't get help. So you just have to be really persistent and try to get your paperwork in and things like that. But that was the hardest part of the whole process.
Interacting with the prison staff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And especially after lockdown, it's almost like they stopped working.
Right.
So you couldn't get a lot done. But I feel the same way as Rufus says. I can't leave them behind either. This is my goal. When I left, I'm not going to do anything except try to help. The same for the people that are in there. The prison system is, as you guys know, a joke. I mean, there's people in there for just the minor things that should not be locked up, and we've got to have reform.
Would you have known that before you were there?
No, absolutely not. I thought prisons were where people were really guilty and they needed to be there. Yeah. Total 180. Yeah.
I mean, when you see somebody like Rufus who spent 30 years and Kenny like 25 years, I just, that's part of why FAM does this, is try to personalize these issues. Because if you don't, if you hear it in the abstract way, you hear a crime on paper, it may sound serious, and you think, well, that person deserves, a punishment. Right. And then you see the people we're talking about, and then you hear from their family members who are also serving the time with their loved ones. Kenny, I mean, how did you keep hope? I mean, you had a life sentence. I mean, did you ever think, there had to be days where you thought, I'm not coming home, or did you never think that? Did you think, no, I'm getting out of here? And I'll say this, I know you had support from your loved ones. Your son came to our conference last year. You had champions on the outside, and talk about the role of having advocates among family members and how that sustains you.
Well, for one reason, I always thought that I was getting out. I just didn't try to put a date or a time or a venue that would get me there. I just felt like it would happen, sooner or later, and I thought whenever it happened, it would be the right time, and just went on with that. And every time something that valid came up, I was working on it for myself, and also I stayed kind of experienced. Excuse me, because I helped a lot of other people who were, more eligible than me on different venues. And so basically, I had one focus on that the whole time, plus, reform and working with plenty of advocates for prison reform in one manner or another. And then the rest of the time I used as a student of restorative justice, which is something that really needs to be, brought to focus, which I consider is the only real option for reform. And there's a lot of that in this First Step Act, and I want to spend the rest of my time trying to implement that for real.
Yeah. Rufus, you stay positive, I know, because you would call Ann in our office, and we couldn't believe how positive you were given the hand you were dealt. And how did you do it? And I mean, you said you kept your head outside. Sometimes I've talked to people, and this was true of me, having my head outside made it harder inside because I needed to focus in on what I was doing and not get distracted by things outside. But how did you stay positive, that entire time?
I think what it was, by listening and seeing other people's situations worse than mine.
Yeah.
Because, and I really understood what they meant when they said, you always, you think your situation is bad, but there's always someone a lot worse than yours, And by hearing that and seeing is believing, And I see some people that, because time doesn't dictate, the person that you are, you know, that doesn't dictate who I am in terms of the amount of time I have. Because you could have a person that has 5 years or 4 years or whatever, and he could do harder time than you can that have 40 years or 50 years of life sentence, And so by listening, and then again, he might have a medical situation that's far worse than you do, and then you might not have a medical situation, And so I got a chance to listen to individual stories in there. And that was an older gentleman named Bernie. When I first came in the system, he put me on track, and he sat down with me once he saw where I was more settled in, and he explained some of the same things that I'm explaining now. And, because I started looking at my family, my parents and loved ones, and because everything was about me, at one time, but I didn't realize, just as you just stated, when you're doing time, your family is doing time also. And those ones that love you are doing time as well. And so I started more or less putting myself on the back burner and start dealing with their situation more and trying to keep them from doing time with me while I'm doing time,
Well, let me ask about that. That's actually a good segue, because a lot of the families that we are in touch with on a daily basis are worried to death about their loved ones inside, always, but more so now with the COVID. They were worried about with the protests we've had in the wake of the killing of George Floyd, and then the prisons were locked down even tougher these last couple weeks. They went on to an enhanced lockdown. The food has been terrible as a result of that. But so they're worried to death about their loved ones, and they're advocating for them, but they're also, it can be it can overwhelm them. And so, Lan, what do you say as somebody who's been on both sides of this, really, and now you're on the outside being an advocate, but for family members, what would you say? I mean, how to manage that stress, and how should they be thinking about it?
Well, for one, I think people need to realize that even though prison is hard, we have kind of a life in there. We make the most of it. And it actually makes it harder on us when our family members are worried about us, or we talk to them. And a lot of times we call just to hear what's going on the outside, to feel that family closeness. But you have lives, this, Kevin, and we laugh, we have some good times, and we're always thinking about when we get home, and we're sharing those things. We're sharing our pictures with roommates. I had 6 people in my room, so we tried to have a good time, get along. And I think that families most of all need to know that we worry more about them because they're doing the time with us, and they have to manage that along with their jobs and things like that. And don't worry so much. We're okay.
Kenny, what do you say to that? I see you nodding.
Yes, I say Leanne and Rufus both are exactly right. It really doesn't help us any to know that our families are worrying. And I always tried to kind of counter that with getting into their lives, what's going on with them as we communicate back and forth. There's really not too much that isn't repetitious about prison to talk about. So it would help me and probably help them to, relate to the outside things, what's happening at home, in a normal way, so that they don't feel the stress or worry about. And really, like Luann says, there's really not that much to worry about because they really don't have that much control. It's just a situation, and we're going to get through it.
Yeah.
We're going to have good times and bad.
It's hard to share in the same way you do when you're out, because if somebody says, "What'd you do today?" Well, I stood for count, and then I went to work, and then I ate lunch.
Exactly.
Times 5,000 days.
Yeah.
I don't know, Kenny, are you on home confinement now? Or are you released completely? Do you have any monitoring?
I'm released completely, compassionate release. Yes.
Yeah. And Rufus, you're on home confinement, right?
Yes, I'm on home confinement.
Do you have an ankle monitor or anything?
No, I'm just the ankle monitor.
You do have an ankle monitor. Do you need to get that?
I got the ankle monitor.
Yeah. And what's your restriction like? Do you have freedom of movement? Hold on, he's taking that call. Okay, Leanne, are you on any sort of?
Yes, I'm on home confinement, and I can probably, Rufus, when your phone rings, it's a voice activated thing, so you must answer it, and then you have to repeat these digits. So I'm confined to the home. Just have to answer the phone when it rings.
Gotcha.
And no ankle monitor or anything like that.
And then what about? So are you there 24/7, or can you give a schedule and leave and do other things? Or not?
I can put in for a schedule to leave. I haven't done that yet. I had 2 weeks of quarantine, so I'm just kind of, getting back out there.
How long is your home confinement supposed to be? Do you know?
Yeah, till August of 21.
Oh, so you got out for compassionate release. I've seen this before, but then they say you're going to serve the remaining part of your sentence on home confinement.
Correct. But I'll do this all day long.
Yeah, not everybody's got that. Like Kenny, I mean, some of these compassion releases are time served, you're done.
Right.
They're holding you a little bit more, but you'll take it, I'm sure.
I'm absolutely, without a doubt.
Rufus, what is your home confinement like? Is it just somebody calling you? Do you have freedom of movement if you give them a schedule?
Okay.
Or what?
What happened is, as you stated, I'm confined to the house. I can walk in the yard and so forth, and I have to call in the morning, call the center in the morning between 7 and 9 in the morning. And then I called again at night between 7 and 9 at night also. And they docketed me down, and that way they'll call later on about 10 at night. In the evening, they would contact me and see, check out, make sure that, I'm, I guess, still in place or whatever, And there's nothing difficult about it,
Yeah.
And if I want, say, if I have to, I want to go to town or whatever, then I have to give them advance notice, and
Right.
fax certain things to them.
You'll take it though, right?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Well,
I
let me
went
ask
into
you-
Walmart for the first time. I couldn't
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of, in the wake of this, the racial unrest that we're having right now, it's not unrest, it's an awakening about making changes in our society. And so we're seeing people who have been resistant to ideas being open to them. And there'll be changes at the federal and state level, I'm sure. But so let me put you on the spot. You've been in prison for a while now. You know the federal prison system. Donald Trump calls you tomorrow and says, Kenny, Leanne, Rufus, I'm making you the director of the BOP. And what changes, or what's your first change, or like what's the couple changes you'd make? Kenny, you take that one.
Well, the first thing I would do is get the wardens to run their prisons. For some reason, and I guess it was a lot of reasons, they really don't do that now. A lot of the employees kind of do their job the way they see it fit. And I think we could do so much more with good programming, rehabilitation, including implementing some of these provisions if the wardens actually run their institution. That would be the first one. Not an easy one, but probably have to fire a few to get their attention. But I think that's something that's really necessary.
Well, let me follow up on that. When you say get the wardens to run their institution, I mean, do you mean because they mostly, as long as no one escapes, they feel like they've done their job, but they're not interested in rehabilitation and stuff?
Exactly right. That's exactly right. And this new restorative justice that I'm on is not popular in the institution with the wardens or central office. It's starting to seep in now, but from regions on down, it's not a popular thing because it doesn't focus specifically on punishment. And we know, all the criminologists know, punishment doesn't really make us better people. So to implement some of them programs, the wardens have to take control.
Yeah, I hear you on that. I was struck, I wasn't there long, but just that people just get allowed to do whatever they want. And so you're just warehousing people, but there's no sense of ownership or counseling that says, this is what I did and I need to address that harm. And maybe there's something I could do more active than just sit here and hang out and be bored. I could actually do something to make amends. Rufus, you've just got the call. Trump's made you BOP director. What do you do?
Okay, what I would do, first, I would institute push the Pell Grants back into the institutions, because that was working. Because that gave, where individuals came in the prison, where it meant some of them might have had high school or GED education status. And then, when you got the college programs, consistent of Pell Grant, then that gave individuals the initiative to want to go back to school and get degrees. So, and many of the ones that, when they had the Pell Grants set up, you didn't have a recidivism, just like you got now, And now what you're seeing in the prison system today, with that gone, you're seeing guys coming into prison just like they leave out the prison the same way they came in with,
Exactly.
came in with a 7th or 8th grade education, they going out the same way. And when you had those programs, you had individuals that was coming in and getting degrees. Many of them got AA, BA, BS, master's degrees, and even PhD degrees. And some of the ones that's at those colleges and universities that was one time in prison, and they were able to get those degrees through the Pell Grants. So,
Yeah.
and you didn't have as many prisons as you got now.
Right.
The way it appears that they set up, now I think you got 120, 122 prisons, federal prisons across the country.
Right.
So, but
Right.
anyway, two is that I would hire wardens, some wardens that did time before in these prisons. Because, the states, from what I was told, they got wardens that, some of them that was in prison at one time, and those prisons are running real, better, far better, because here's a guy that knows what it's like to do time, but
Yeah.
when you don't, and then a lot of the programs that they used to have in prison is gone, reentry programs, so I would bring back numerous of reentry programs within the institutions as well.
Right.
And-
All right. So we got education, rehabilitation. You guys are on the same track, Leanne. Are you gonna
Same
send
thing.
somebody? Are you gonna send anybody home or what?
Oh, yes, and then the home confinement programs and the compassionate release. That wouldn't even be a question. I would sign off on those ones because you
Yeah.
got numerous of men and women that deserve that, and the warden has the power to do so.
Right.
To do so, you're not going to lose your job by allowing this young lady or this gentleman to go home.
Right. All right,
So-
Leanne.
I would first thing close all the camps. No reason for a camp. You've got people there, one guard, he sits in an office. You're pretty much policing yourself. So I feel like there's no need to have a waste of taxpayer money for people put in a camp situation. Those people could totally be at home.
I remember the woman who founded FAM, Julie Stewart, came and visited me when I was in prison, and we were in the visiting room, and we walked up to the guard as we're getting ready to leave, and she said, "This is crazy. This guy doesn't need to be here." He said, "If it were up to me, we'd close all the camps." I mean, he said that. He didn't think anybody there needed to be there. And I'm with you on compassion release, home confinement. These rules that they've implemented now for COVID, those should be in place all the time.
Exactly.
People could have been sent to home confinement before. So anyway, hey, we got to wrap up. I just want to thank you all so much for taking time to share your stories with us, for working this new technology to connect from all around the country. Everyone wishes you well and happiness and luck and success during your time of freedom, which you've earned. So again, thanks for joining us, and everybody watching, we'll talk to you again soon. So thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.